Masayoshi, you got the exclusive interview. I remember Polina telling me at one point, she was like, "This has got to be the number one interview that everyone wants." One, how did you get them to agree to do it? And then two, tell us everything about that piece.
Yeah, so talking to Masayoshi Son was like top of my list for probably 3 years, ever since the Vision Fund burst onto the tech scene. And for those who aren't super familiar, like $100 billion fund to invest in tech companies. That's at a factor bigger than we'd ever seen before. Some of the biggest VC firms in the world, their AUM is maybe 10 billion now. But so $100 billion fund just to invest in these companies, it was just a massive impact, right? And we were talking about it, the whole tech world, reporting world, we're talking about the impact of this fund for good and bad. But talking to Masa, who's based in Japan and doesn't do a lot of interviews, was really hard. I basically found out that he gave maybe one English language interview a year. And so I just had to be that interview at some point. And I tried, multiple times and failed. But around the end of last year, the beginning of 2020, there were a lot of doubts around SoftBank and the Vision Fund. WeWork had obviously been a massive blow up. And Uber, its stock was not doing great. Its shares were underwater from a SoftBank standpoint. There was a lot of doubt. So basically, what I did is I said, I am not going to be beholden to any narrative. I'm going to hear you guys out. And if there's a way that SoftBank can still win here, or that Masa's misunderstood, I will take that beginner's mind and I will hear it out. And I will try to give you guys a fair shake. And I think my track record and I guess my sales pitch were strong enough that they thought, okay, we will try that. But I think it was definitely nervy on both sides. And I did meet with Masa in March, right before everything shut down in New York. It was a really interesting experience and interview. And he was much more unrepentant than I thought he would be. I had a bunch of questions like, what have you learned from this? Or what would you do differently? And for someone like him, the answer was kind of my tactics might have been wrong, but my strategy is always right. And it's that is, that's what's made him so successful. But it also is why I think the criticisms can be fair too. So it was a trip. Talking to all the people in the SoftBank orbit was a unique experience. It was extremely stressful, but we were really happy, with the story that we were able to put together. And I hope that anyone in the audience who goes and reads that story would think it's a fair look at kind of why they're in tough straits, but also how Masa can sort of always, pull himself out of the fire in the end.
Yeah. When you met with them in person, was there any other takeaways that you had in terms of, it takes a special guy to on the way to pitch somebody for $100 billion to literally say, I think the story is they were on the plane and somebody showed them the deck and it said a 30-year plan. And he said, add a zero, right, to make it a 300-year plan. Yeah. So anyone who just thinks that way is obviously very different. But what were some of the takeaways from meeting him in person, getting to talk to him?
Well, first off, Masa is a lot less imperial than I think he comes off as. Part of that is because he has an entourage. He's based in Japan. You go through so many hoops to meet him that you've kind of built him up in your head. But he's actually, a relatively, small, smiling, unthreatening seeming man physically, just in his, sweater and everything. And he kind of walks serenely surrounded by this constellation of freaked out, intense people. So that was my first impression, is just that everywhere he went, it seemed like he was totally calm. And this is someone that if you sat next to him at a ramen place, you could have a beer with him. But all his handlers, all his lieutenants, no, you could not. And they would not let you get close to him. So that was one. I would say in terms of how he speaks, he is definitely one of these big picture folks. He'll speak in big metaphors. He'll speak in kind of the arc of history. As someone who studied history, I could appreciate that. But some people love that he can just sort of fit together a future, the technological future of the next 30 years into a coherent narrative. And that just really resonates. And then everything he does is kind of fitting the narrative. For other people, that is just inflexible and like impossible to actually do anything with. Like he could say AI is going to have a bigger impact on the world than the microchip. And you could be like, cool, that may be right. Like, what does that actually mean for us in the day to day? And one of the big things that I was trying to understand was like, okay, if he thinks that data and AI are the future, what does that actually mean for these companies? Like, can Uber actually benefit from that in any meaningful way? Can DoorDash suddenly beat all its competitors just because we understand that data is important? Like, there are limits to what you can do with data. And in fact, like, people are much more mindful now about how their data is used. So I think for me, the interesting thing was that he has this like 40,000 foot view of the world, and then he's trying to apply it, on a company by company basis. And I think that's where things can either go great or they can go really badly.
Yeah. Was there any sense of maybe you talked about like him as a person, but any of the views that he held where you felt like he is either really misunderstood or people just have misconceptions, like he believes A, but everyone thinks he believes B?
Yeah, I would say that he sees the power law of investing, I think, just a little more nakedly than a lot of VCs who actually probably believe it more in private than they would say. Masa just believes that a lot of markets are a winner-take-all market, effectively. That one brand is just going to end up crushing most of the others. And obviously that's true in some industries. It's maybe not so true in other industries. But I think that directionally, he's not as crazy as it seems about that. And so are you really overpaying in the short term if all you're doing is trying to find that outlier, like winner take all market? I would say probably not as much as he's sort of ridiculed for. I think the problem is where you think that maybe a market is winner take all and it's not. And so you put a lot of money into something without it ever really being able to be the breakout. Like hopefully there will continue to be a lot of podcast companies. And so if you had just crazy valued, Gimlet or Wondery or whatever, like it will crush every other podcast company. Probably not going to be the case. The other thing I would say is that I think like Masa is more self-aware than I think a lot of people think. Like he knows the criticism. He's not like some like, I don't know, naive person who just like doesn't understand what people think about him. I just don't think he cares. And there is something to admire there of just the person who like knows that a lot of people doubt them and just sleeps well at night anyway. Like he was like, I asked him like, what do you think about everyone just kind of like, making fun of the Vision Fund or thinking like you're a crazy person for what you're doing? And he was like, oh, I had it worse after the .com bubble. He's like, this is nothing. I don't know, like if I would feel that way, but I did kind of have to respect him for just being so unperturbed.
Yeah. Well, and I think the part that was interesting is a lot of people forget he was nobody. He became the richest guy in the world, lost it all. And then I think he became the richest guy in the world a second time or came close to it. Right. And so he's kind of had this this very epic boom and bust cycles personally. Right. And so I think that does probably harden you a little bit.
I think it also like, I think it's weird for some investors to have an investor who doesn't seem to be motivated just by like hoarding money. Like I don't know if it's a gambler mentality or what it is, but like he, as you said, he claims to have been the richest person in the world briefly during the .com bubble. Everything was so crazy that's very hard to perfectly confirm. Mm-hmm. But yeah, SoftBank lost over 90%, almost 99% of its stock value in the .com bubble burst. And he could have easily just like moved on to something else, but he just built it all up again. And then the question is like, why? Like, if you're already the richest person in the world, what is compelling you? And he's not Bill Gates going to, cure malaria or something. He just like can't stop trying to play out his thesis about like where tech is going. And I think that is really confusing for a lot of investors who, whatever they say, are ultimately like money driven.